Kingdom Hearts is my favorite piece of media of all time. Above any movie, above any song, nothing has resonated so strongly with me as these games have. It never fails to bring a smile to my face. Its highs are some of my favorite moments in video games, and its lows still have some charm to it. I've thought a long time about how I want to talk about one of my favorite games of all time. The history of the game, the inner world traveling experience, and the legacy it would come to build. I couldn't pick just one, so I decided on everything. Kingdom Hearts was a game that, if you looked at it from first glance, should have never been allowed to happen. A Final Fantasy and Disney crossover, visiting beloved Disney worlds, Mickey Mouse, Winnie the Pooh, Cloud Strife, and Sephiroth, all in a single game which before 2003 would have sounded like a bad fanfic. It all came down to one big chance. You've probably heard the tale of how Kingdom Hearts was a chance encounter in an elevator, but it's not quite the full and accurate story. At the turn of the century, Squaresoft was in a weird spot. Final Fantasy continued to do well, so well it had a major movie coming out, but everything else they put out wasn't quite reaching what Final Fantasy could do. One day, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the father of Final Fantasy, and game producer Shinji Hashimoto were discussing the idea of creating an open-world game for the newly released PS2. Mario 64 revolutionized gaming when it first came out, and everybody wanted a piece of the new open-world pie. But a lot of even the most popular attempts fell short of what Mario 64 was able to achieve. Mario already had a foundation behind him. He was instantly recognizable even before the game came out, and Square knew if they wanted a chance of making something like that, it would need to be bigger than Mario. But that's almost impossible. At that point, you need someone like Bugs Bunny or Mickey Mouse. A 30-year-old Tetsuya Nomura, character designer credited with creating some of Square's biggest characters, Cloud Strife, Squall Leonhart, and Tidus, overheard the two and volunteered to lead this project. But this is Disney we're talking about. This was at a time where they didn't share anything with pretty much anyone, and they did their best to keep everything in its own lane. They had never done a crossover between their own IPs, and a crossover with a video game company? As fate would have it, Disney and Square were sharing an office space at the time. In an elevator ride, Mr. Hashimoto and a Japanese Disney executive had a conversation about how nice it would be if they were able to work together, and this led to further meetings, and it seemed like this project would become a reality. Nomura immediately began working on what would become Kingdom Hearts before it was even greenlit. He began to design a main character, write the story, plan which properties would be present, and the game was quickly taking a shape of its own. But when they finally met, Disney had a much different plan. They pitched some ideas, one starring Donald Duck, but Nomura wanted nothing to do with any of it. When he began his pitch for Kingdom Hearts and showed them this, they were truly speechless. They went back and forth, and eventually they reached the design we know today. This all seemed to be going very well, but they still weren't even greenlit to work on this project. Disney Japan didn't have the power to grant something like this, and with a project as ambitious as this, it seemed like a pipe dream. Michael Eisner and Bob Iger, Disney's president and chief operating officer at the time, came down for a performance review of the Japanese branch. Among other things, Kingdom Hearts was presented for the first time. Two people with the power to greenlight this project finally got to see it. They presented it, and after some questions and input, Michael Eisner told them, "Keep at it and do it right." With the green light they've been waiting for, they hit the ground full force. For something so experimental, so ambitious, and so outside of Disney's comfort zone, they gave Nomura a lot of free will and a ton of properties to use. Of course Disney had their rules. Characters couldn't leave their worlds, the plots couldn't be heavily altered, but the biggest rule of them all, no Mickey Mouse. The most we got out of the king was a brief moment near the end of the game, but outside of this, they were given complete artistic control. Kingdom Hearts has my favorite in-the-making story in all of video games. It really cannot be understated how many stars had to align to make this game happen. If Michael Eisner decided not to greenlight it during his visit, if Disney Japan rejected Nomura's ideas, if Hashimoto and that executive never met in that elevator, none of this would exist today. Kingdom Hearts was a miracle in the making, and the end result did not disappoint. There's a reason every single Kingdom Hearts game starts like this, because it's perfect. There's something about Dearly Beloved that makes it so special. The piano, the ocean noises, the chorus lulling in the background, it matches the simplicity of the title screen so perfectly, it cannot be understated. Kingdom Hearts 1.5 Final Mix is the definitive version of this game. It has the best resolution, the best controls, all of the content, and the hardest difficulties. If you want the best and fullest Kingdom Hearts 1 experience, it's right here. There's 3 different difficulties you can choose from in the original Kingdom Hearts. Beginner, the easiest experience, but you're locked out of the secret endings. Standard is the average difficulty and has access to all the secret endings, but it has the most requirements in order to reach them. And Proud Mode offers the hardest challenge the game has to offer, especially with 0 EXP, and technically the easiest secret ending requirements. Personally, I think Standard Mode is the best way to enjoy this game if it's your first time through. It allows you to see everything the game has to offer, and it provides an adequate challenge. And without further ado, let's begin. Unfortunately, I can't play without a copyright claim, but the opening in Simple and Clean is full of this cryptic, confusing, but charming energy the series is full of. It really does start here. Watching any Kingdom Hearts opening scene for the first time feels like mental gymnastics, but I couldn't imagine the games without it. The first major decisions the game throws at you are in the prologue and interlude, and they are the powers you take and sacrifice and your level curve throughout the game. These decisions, while not clearly defined or stated, do have a major impact on your experience throughout the game. It changes the amount of items you can hold, the order you learn moves, and of course your stats. I used to think Shield was the weakest choice by a long shot, but in reality, it's considered one of the best options to choose for its high item slots. The same goes for the interlude, which through a series of personal questions determines how fast Sora will level up throughout the game. If you pick the first options, you leave at dawn, and you have a fast level up experience from 1 to 50, but it's slowed from 51 to 100. If you pick the middle options, you leave midday, and it's a consistent speed throughout the entire game. If you pick the last options, you leave at midnight, you'll have a slow level up from 1 to 50, but a very fast one from 51 to 100. I wish more games gave you this level of freedom. Sure, a lot of RPGs have a class system, but this gives unique spins on a game that on the surface level looks like the same each time. But it's a very different experience if you look closer. There's not a definitive path for these choices. It's whatever you value and however you want to go throughout the game. Outside of these major decisions, we meet the Heartless for the first time and we encounter our first boss, which although the outcome doesn't exactly matter in terms of story progression, it does introduce some things although not explicitly stated. The first fight with Darkseid is the first time the player will learn about multiple weak points, and it's most likely the first time you'll see the tech points icon. Tech points, for how insanely valuable they are, aren't explained at all. In all major and minor fights, Sora has the chance to earn technique points, which is a special version of experience points. Typically, it rewards you for parrying an attack, deflecting an enemy spell, and a couple other unique instances. These are a really strong way to earn experience points. While Darkseid gives you 2 tech points per finisher on its head, and 1 for deflecting these projectiles, some of the bosses give you up to 24 tech points per parry and deflection. Although it's not the greatest system, I think it works for the game. It's nice to see actual reward from playing well. Kingdom Hearts gets a label of being super button mashy, which it definitely can be at times, but this encourages players to not necessarily do that every single fight. After our fight with Darkseid, no matter what the outcome is, we find Sora as he wakes up on Disneyland, Destiny Islands. We're introduced to Riku and Kairi, Sora's best friends, and their talks and desires to leave the island. They're planning to see if there are other worlds by building Raft, and it's our job to collect all the materials they need. While we're searching for materials, we find a mysterious door and an even more mysterious hooded man speaking cryptically until he just vanishes. Once we collect all the ship parts, the night they agree to leave, disaster strikes. Destiny Island is invaded with the Heartless from the intro. Riku is swallowed by the darkness, and before we can reach him, the power of the Keyblade unlocks within us. We find Kairi at the mysterious cave from earlier, from before where she seemingly disappears before our very eyes. We are whisked away to a floating part of the island with another fight with Darkseid. This fight is almost identical to the one from earlier, although he has more HP, gives a little bit more experience, with one extra attack. But this time you have to beat him to continue. At the same time as these events are unfolding, Donald Duck and Goofy Goof find that their king has disappeared, leaving only a letter telling them something bad is happening to the worlds, and he needs them to go to Traverse Town to find the one with the key. And that concludes Destiny Islands. A lot of people who play this game for the first time probably overlook some of the side things you can do, but they serve as really good tutorials. 3 children from the interlude, Wakka, Sephi, and Tidus, are also here. These 3 actually serve as a pretty good tutorial into combat as well as practicing tech point scenarios. Wakka gives you a projectile to hit, Tidus gives you sword swings to parry, and Sephi lets you deflect her whip. Once you defeat all 3 of them in one-on-one, you can fight them all at once, and it's a fun challenge for this early in the game. You can also fight Riku, which serves as an introduction to the retaliation system. Every Kingdom Hearts game has a retaliation system. In Kingdom Hearts 1, a majority of bosses had a counter limit, where after a certain amount of combos or hits, they will use a specific move to prevent you from comboing them to death. Sephiroth, for example, has 2 counters. After being hit 4 times in one combo or 7 times in total, he will retaliate with this specific move. This system is meant to keep the game from being a button mash fest, however some instances where it's used just make the fights take longer and suck the skill out of the game. For example, in the fight with Oogie Boogie, where you reach his counter limit, he will knock you off the area where you're able to combo him and you have to go through the sequence again to reach him. While Sephiroth's counter move has counterplay and can be punished, Oogie Boogie's turns his fight into mostly a waiting game. Overall, I think Destiny Islands is a pretty good introduction to the game. A lot of this stuff is super easy to overlook, but if you actually do everything it has to offer, you can learn a good amount and get very comfortable with the game's mechanics. We find Donald and Goofy have arrived at Traverse Town, and just around the corner, a waking Sora, confused and lost. After we wake up, we meet Sid the shopkeeper, who tells us our friends might be around, but once we start exploring, we see the Heartless have invaded this world as well. We then go on this goofy little cartoon sequence to find our friends, and each time we leave a door, Donald and Goofy leave the previous one, until we've searched everywhere not able to find anyone. We touch back with Sid, and after that we're introduced to Leon through a pseudo boss fight. Leon can hit you really hard, but like Darkseid, win or lose, the game will go on. Sora wakes up to a hallucination of Kairi, who actually turns out to be Yuffie and Leon, who tell him he's the Keyblade's chosen one and that Destiny Islands, his home, is gone. Before we can think about it, the Heartless appear and Sora, Donald, and Goofy meet for the first time at the final encounter of Traverse Town, Guard Armor. Guard Armor is a pretty tame fight. Focus on one limb at a time, starting with the arms, and the fight gets progressively easier. Once we finish the fight with Guard Armor, we agree to set off with Donald and Goofy to explore other worlds for the king and our friends. Before we leave, if you beat Leon earlier, he'll give you an elixir, Donald will teach you fire, and Goofy will teach you dodge roll. And with that, our first visit to Traverse Town is concluded. Traverse Town is a sort of hub world throughout the game. There's a ton of stuff they introduce here, although most of it is inaccessible until much later into the game. I'm going to go into more detail with this later, but one thing we can do is interact with Trinities. Trinities are for the most part progress blockers. You start with the blue Trinity, and after different worlds you'll unlock different colors. If you're not using a Trinity to progress the story, 9 times out of 10 you're just going to get materials, Mooney, or some kind of other resource. I don't have an issue with Trinities, they're fun to find and get small rewards, but at the end of the day, they're just meant to keep the pacing. There's also the Dalmatian House, and we're tasked with finding 99 of them. Although this seems daunting, you find them in sets of 3 throughout all the worlds, so it's only 33 things we need to find in total. The rewards vary on how useful they are, however, if you're playing on the final mix difficulty, it's important to find them all if you want the secret endings. While Sora begins his adventures in Traverse Town, we get a scene where Riku wakes up in a mysterious waterfall-like area, and an evil woman finds him lost and confused. These scenes are unique to Final Mix, and add additional context and insight to what other main characters are doing throughout the game. These are some of my favorite changes to Final Mix. The added scenes really add a lot to characters like Riku, and make the characters feel more fleshed out by the end. We set out for our first world, and we reach everyone's favorite part of a Kingdom Hearts game, the Gummy Ship. This is another sequence of the game that doesn't really become fully fleshed out until later in the game, so it'll be another thing I delve into later, but for now, it's just a required half-speed Star Fox segment we need to do each time we set off for a new world. If we take the higher path, we reach Wonderland, and the group sees Niven McTwisp running off to the trial of Alice. Alice is being charged with attempting to steal the Queen's heart, and and before she's put to death, Sora offers to defend Alice, and we're tasked with finding evidence that Alice isn't the culprit. There's 4 different pieces of evidence you can get. You only need to find one, but if you go out of your way to find all 4, you can learn Blizzard a bit early. Once you've collected your evidence, the Queen takes it all, scrambles it up, and you're required to pick just one box. There's a chance you can open a Heartless, Donald, Goofy, or if you're really unlucky, both. If you open any version of Donald or Goofy, they'll be trapped for the following fight with the playing cards. The fight with the playing cards is typically pretty easy. If you end up losing Donald, Goofy, or both of them, you can free them from their cages to make the fight easier. You can attack the Queen to make her topple and the guards will become distracted. You can attack the playing cards, but they give you 0 EXP and they revive pretty quickly, so it's best to focus on the tower until it's destroyed. Once we finish lowering Alice's gate, we find that it's empty and we go back to the forest to look for her. Cheshire Cat leads us to the Bazaar room where we find some new enemies as well as light these fixtures. Once we're done with this, we head back to the room we shrunk in, and it's here we have the final fight of Wonderland, Trickmaster. This fight highlights one of my biggest issues with these games, Donald and Goofy. These two are constantly dying or running out of resources, to the point they're genuinely useless. There are some behaviors you can influence, but I personally haven't had any profound improvements changing these. For the beginning chunk of the game, they might as well not be there. In this fight specifically, Goofy and Donald will sometimes jump up and get a couple of stray hits in, but that's the fullest extent of it. It becomes insanely obvious when you really watch what they're doing, how poorly designed they are. If you got the Blizzard spell from earlier, it'll be useful in this fight, but even still, this fight is pretty basic. Like Donald and Goofy, you can get some stray hits on the legs, or if you jump on the table, you can get full combos on the base of his body. He can knock down the table and share for a period of time, and once he reaches half health, he will light his torches and begin using fire spells. Once you defeat Trickmaster, Sora seals his first keyhole in, ironically, the keyhole, and once it's sealed, it spits out a Navi G piece, which lets us travel to new worlds. If you didn't unlock Blizzard earlier, you will now, and that concludes the main story of Wonderland. This is one of the best integrated worlds Sora visits. He feels pretty organic in the plot, he doesn't feel shoehorned in or out of place here, and the set design does a good job of making Wonderland feel like Wonderland. Unlike some of the other worlds, the environments feel like a really good mix of a good combat arena, but also an actual world.